So, have you ever been to the Upside Down? Maybe you catch it in a dream or a moment when rage and anger and despair get to be a little bit too much and you invert. So, Stranger Things is an allegory about shadow work in a way that resonates deeply with all of us. It has an aspect of nostalgia that reminds us of a time when we were younger. Combined with its numerous coming of age stories, it helps us to find what kind of growth we are capable of experiencing in ourselves. And maybe not everyone has experienced monsters, real or metaphorical, the way the kids in Hawkins do, but for the people with unresolved trauma, the monsters can feel real because they are held inside of us in the places that hold grief, unfinished stories, the parts of us that are in ourselves but tucked away. And Stranger Things is not just a show about kids coming of age. The Duffer Brothers, the writers of Stranger Things, have created a world that is filled with intention, depth, and redemption arcs for every single one of its characters. At least we hope so, as the fifth story is about to come about. It is important for us to remember that the monsters are never just out there. They are within. And this is a story about what happens when the walls between the two worlds of within and without collapse. This is Inner Stories, Outer Worlds, and I am Kristina Wiltsee, your life alchemist, to take you through Stranger Things today in all of its beautiful nuance, including predictions for season 5 based on the arcs. Stranger Things is ultimately a story about a little girl whose inner trauma has been ripped from her internal self and put into the world around her. The characters she meets along the way are necessary supporting figures who help her deal with her trauma, and in doing so, collapse the Upside Down, or at least we think so. The complexity of the ensemble nature of the show makes it so that each supporting character must also complete their own act, and we can only hope that they all will. So the Upside Down resembles the inner world of Eleven, the subconscious, the wounded child, the repressed rage that bleeds into the outer world, and wholeness only comes when those shadows are not just fought but seen, named, and loved. And Vecna is not just a villain. He's the dark passenger of Eleven, the part of her that knows how to destroy, how to scream portals open once he learns from her, the part of her that could kill anyone if given the right motivation. And when she suppresses that rage, it doesn't disappear. It just waits and festers until it bursts through another doorway, just like Vecna did. So here are a couple of things that we know are absolutely important for Chapter 5. Chapter 1, we're going to cover the character arcs, which includes the position of where they are now and where we anticipate that they'll go based on the villains that they're showing up as. Villains to heroes to legends, the arcs that we talk about a lot on Inner Worlds, Outer Stories. Chapter 2, we're going to talk about the chapter titles and what they could possibly mean. And then Chapter 3, we're just going to look at clues, the Talisman book, Nancy's diary, Nancy's vision, and how we're going to see that that is going to play out, I suspect, in season 5. Chapter 1. It's not how they're alike, it's how they're not. Every character in this series carries forth with them a redemption arc, a theme, what I call an inner villain transformation arc. Think of it as a strategy that each of them choose either before or during any of the 4 seasons that we have seen of Stranger Things. These strategies in good writing get played all the way through their different guises, their different personas, until finally redemption is found, and then they can be useful in a different way, and they can go beyond even just the redemption arc to where else it can go. And in case you're wondering, the Duffer Brothers obviously don't know this system, but what we see is that the system has a very specific way of describing the natural arcs that we find in all of our lives. So if the Duffer Brothers characters are following these arcs, it's because they're both listening to the natural arising of transformations that happens in characters in real life, and they've simplified it down into fiction. So let's start with Max as an example of this, because she's ahead of everybody else because she did a lot of her work in season 4 called Dear Billy to come to terms with her pain, to address her shadow and her strategy. And she was heroic in her ability to address and face what was wrong, which put her in a key place to actually progress on her arc, which is where we see her now, even though it seems like she's not actually progressed. That's because I believe that she is on the arc of the Divisive Immortal. Here's a reminder of that arc for everybody who may have missed the Agatha Harkness video that we did earlier describing the Divisive Immortal. The arc surrounds coping with change. It is the undefined splenic center in human design, which always feels physically insecure, and the 6 in the Enneagram, which is the loyal skeptic. The personas of the Divisive Immortal. There is the Divisive Immortal, who is the pinnacle villain. Think Voldemort. There is the catastrophist. There's the outcast, the faithful, and death is the hero of this arc. And the healer is the legend. Here are the clues that we have that Max is on this arc. First, she shows up in the series as Mad Max, which is a reference to the 1979 movie in which a man faces the death and dying of his family and must come to terms with how his grief shapes him. Mad Max must continue to have a beating heart in the midst of a desolate wasteland that is his world. Vecna's landscape that she runs to escape mimics Mad Max's world. And in the most recent adaptations of Mad Max, music is actually used as a manipulation tool, which is interesting. Just as she and Vecna use music to escape or gain control of one another, respectively.
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Max is put in a place of death without actually dying by the end of season 4, and she has moved into the hero of this arc, which is death. She doesn't come back. And you know what? We don't come back from that place without legendary qualities. If we look back at her arc, we can see that she's already done a lot of the work in this. While Billy was alive, she thrives as the outcast, but when given a chance, she wants to become the faithful, which is a part of the friend group of all the boys. She ultimately becomes a catastrophist in order to save Lucas from harm when she's trying to save him from Billy. And after Billy's death, she self-outcasts into grief and guilt, which is one of the things that makes her susceptible to Vecna's power in the first place. So what does this mean for her future? She is going to go either one of two ways. Knowing that she's gone through her heroic arc of dying, there's very likely that I see in the best possible circumstances that she is going to become the legend archetype, which is the healer. She is going to take back qualities from being in the Upside Down and being lost to become a healer and help 11 on the other side. Because ultimately, 11 needs to have a guide on the Upside Down side, and she needs to have one on the right side up side. And it makes sense that this is going to be Max. There is a small chance, given the chapter titles, which we'll talk about later, that Max actually becomes a faithful of Vecna and that she becomes like Charles Wallace in the Wrinkle in Time, but we'll get to that later. Look in the description below if you want to understand the links to all the breakdowns that you'll see later on. So that's an example in Max, because what we're going to actually use to do the order and the breakdown is the final shots of every single person from the end of season 4, the piggyback episode, because I think that those are incredibly important for how we understand how the arcs are going to go in the future. In addition to that, there are a couple of guidelines that I'm going to use to determine what arc everyone is in. One is who are their villains in their subplots, aka their side quests. For instance, Lucas is with the popular basketball boys. Jason is the quintessential psychopathic captain of the basketball team. This lets me know that Lucas is likely in the Vain Controller arc because Jason is his pinnacle villain. Stranger Things doesn't make a mistake when it comes to who it pairs up with people. And so with Erica and Lucas being companions, they're both on the same arc. So if I'm not sure about Lucas, I just look to Erica, who is a slightly less developed character than Lucas, but it's somebody who has a lot of information about the fact that he's on this arc. Also, what is that person withholding? The other thing that I try and determine when I'm looking at what arc somebody's on is what is the person withholding or holding up is the most important thing. For example, Nancy wants to be organized and she always wants to have a plan. Obedient Critic. Max wants to deal with the death that has happened in her life. Divisive Immortal. Will is working with understanding how to grow up and what that looks like. Eternal Child. All right, so let's continue. And you know what? As I said before, the Duffer Brothers don't make mistakes. Apart from perhaps the roller skating incident in which they made that on Will's birthday, I find that so hard to believe that that's a mistake. So we are going to start our character analysis using all of the final shots from the piggyback, because what we know is that that is going to be indicative, I think, of where we're going with everybody. So we're going to start with the people not on the hill in chronological order of where the final shot shows them. So that is going to be, first we see Karen and Holly, then we see Dustin, then we see Lucas and Erica, and then we see Steve and Vickie and Robin, and then we see everybody on the hill, which is first Nancy and Jonathan, then Hop and Joyce, and then Mike and Will, and then Eleven and the Dead Flowers, aka Henry Creel or Vecna, or anything that is representative of the Upside Down. So first, let's start with Karen and Holly. Mom, it's snowing! Holly is the new representation of the eternal child now that we have the innocence that's been lost with Will and even with Erica, mostly because Will has gone through his arc. And it's very likely that we will see Karen and Holly representing the proxy of Eleven's own healing with her mother. Until now, the only mother-daughter relationships that we have seen is Nancy and Karen, but there is very likely a similarity to what Karen will do to protect Holly, similar to what Eleven's mother also did to protect her or try and get her back. This is something that will invigorate Eleven in her journey towards healing. Next, we have Lucas and Erica. Lucas and Erica are a representation of the Vein Controller, as I mentioned earlier, because Lucas was dealing with popularity, and the pinnacle villain of the Vein Controller is the Vein Controller, which is a representation of Jason. So that's how we know that Lucas is on that arc. The thing that's amazing with it is that Lucas is actually neck and neck with Max in terms of where he is on his arc. Both Lucas and Erica travel together on the arc of the Vein Controller, which is also known as the 3 in the Enneagram, or the successful worker, and the undefined heart center in human design. This arc is primarily concerned with influence as it applies to the allocation of resources. For Lucas, we can see how his main character distinction in the earlier season was about his withdrawal of approval, and thus his effort to sway by any means necessary and influence the group's decisions. The Vein Controller in its worst form looks like Jason, influencing others towards paths of destruction, betrayal, and sabotage. And what we see is that also on this arc is the influencer, which Erica clearly portrays in earlier seasons when she's often trying to influence everybody, and she seems like she's popular, she's got all the friends, she has none of the same issues that Lucas does. She's at a different part in this arc. We see the envious form of this villain in Lucas when Eleven first enters the group. He is very unsure about her, he doesn't like her, and then he actually goes in the next season and goes and finds somebody else.
What did I tell you? She's been playing us from the beginning. That's not true. She helped us find Will. Find Will? Find Will? Where is he then? Huh? I don't see him.
Also on this arc is the Compliant, which we see in Lucas for most of season 4, when he is trying to do the things that will make him no longer be a nerd, despite the fact that he's still participating in the Hellfire Club. The Vein Controller appears to have everything on control on the surface, but underneath is hiding deep, deep parts of themselves. That is the main part of their strategy. And so what we recognize is that the reason that Lucas has gone through such a beautiful part of his arc is that he revealed so much to Jason when he talked to Jason. It was almost a monologue, the way that it was delivered. And what we recognize is that him going into the space of the hero makes it so that he is able to actually be there for Max in a very different way, knowing that Max is also in her heroic part of her arc. So is Lucas. Lucas can then become the inventor, and he can go back into that space of like, hey, I have resources and I have information, I have things like that. And that could be a place where his arc goes now that he's kind of moving out of the main part of his difficulty or his growth and into the part of the legend. The hero of this arc is the Unveiled. And he was hoping that being the Unveiled, he could sway Jason out of being the pinnacle villain, out of being that Vein Controller who's kind of gone psychotic in an effort to try and seek revenge or to finally get control and to try and maintain his perfect life and his successful worker perspective, which is what he did until he lost all control of it. And that's when you get to be the worst. That looks like Regina George when she releases the Burn book. That looks like Glinda when she ends up destroying things in the second part of Wicked, which we won't get to. Those are examples of other Vein Controllers. So Lucas becoming the inventor and stepping back into this role is coming up with interesting solutions to problems, as well as being the earthbound resources for Max so that she can accompany Eleven in the Upside Down. Erica will take on a similar path and support him in those resources, I believe. Then again, she could also do a total 180 and become the next Jason, but I think that is unlikely because Lucas is seen reading the book The Talisman, which we know is a huge influence on the next season. season. And this indicates that Lucas has come through a lot of his arc and will now be providing prophetic resources to the team. So next we have Steve, Robin, and Vickie. And we know that Vickie is going to play a big part because she shows up in the last scene. She shows up behind glass. All three of these represent the Hungry Shapeshifter, which is the 7 on the Enneagram, and the throat center. It's all about expression. We know this because Steve is considered somebody who is never getting the girl. He's always the entertainment. He's the slapstick. He's the comedic timing. He kind of falls into each experience that he has with the Upside Down, and he's never truly the main hero of whatever it is. Think of him as Loki, which is one of the best representations of the Hungry Shapeshifter, someone who's kind of constantly trying to change their identity, even if they're not intentionally doing it in order to be able to be loved or get attention or get what it is that they want. For a while, I thought that Steve was possibly the eternal child, which is Will, or the vain controller, because of the fact that Steve, he struggles with popularity and entitlement, which are two things that are kind of indicative of another thing. But the fact that he keeps shifting and changing his roles, and the fact that his companion in his travels is Robin, who is completely attracted to someone looks kind of exactly like her, with the exception of being a little shorter, indicates to me that Robin is a hungry shapeshifter because she's trying to understand her identity and she's trying to express her identity, and because she is Steve's companion. There's an additional clue in the fact that they are currently behind glass, which to me indicates that their role will likely be limited, or that they will be captured at some point during the 5th season and unable to help in some particular way. The hero of the arc of the Hungry Shapeshifter is actually the presence. It's like being present and being a master of time. And to me, there's some sort of indication that time travel may have something to do with his arc. But I think in general, we're actually going to see that it's a little bit less in this thing, and that he's maybe captured or something along those lines, despite the fact that that's obviously happened in the past. So who knows what that one is. I don't think that Steve is going to die, or Robin, or Vickie. There's a chance that any one of them could take on some sort of persona in which they are hijacked, similar to how the Mind Flayer and Billy is in a previous season. Dustin is an evasive expert. We know that Dustin is an evasive expert because of the fact that he shares his arc in the 4th season, particularly with Eddie, who is also an evasive expert. The evasive expert is the one who always has an answer for everything, and they occupy a space of overthinking, but who also has a kind of dark or hidden side. Maybe it's cowardly, like Eddie says, or maybe it's something that they don't necessarily want to reveal. And we see this most clearly in season 2 when Dustin gets the demo dog and starts to feed it as if it isn't a demogorgon. Like, he's a smart kid, like he knows what this is. And without questioning what that means, he hides it until it becomes completely unmanageable, which to me is an indication of this fact that Dustin has an outside life and he's very compartmentalized, whether it's his experience with his girlfriend or anything like that. We actually haven't seen them together, only talking together. So Dustin is the only one of the 4 besides Will who has gone to the Upside Down, indicating that he is on a very different journey, despite the fact that he's on the group's arc. That's why I think that, like, him being with Eddie at the end is very, being there and actually going to the Upside Down with Eddie is his move along an arc in a very different way. So here are the different personas. The overthinker. Dustin is always seen figuring things out. He's always got it. The sensitive. We see that he puts on a very strong front about not being sensitive about things, but you can tell from his mother's treatment of him that there might be an aspect of him that is sensitive. He also isn't afraid to show some of his emotions sometimes.
So go home. I'll radio if she comes.
Oh, yeah, nice try. You just want me out of here so you can make your move.
Oh, 'cause you're such a threat.
That's right. She will not be able to resist these pearls.
Dustin is the only one that literally has a different relationship with everybody. With Steve, with Eddie, with the others, he's always shifting who he is depending on who he's with. The passionate. We can see that he's the passionate, which is the hero of this arc, by the time that he gets to season 4, about like how passionate he's going to be as he moves into his hero arc in season 5. I think he's going to become passionate about really letting everybody know that Eddie was a good person. Not only that, because Eddie actually finished his arc by the time that he died. He became the integrated. He had integrated his cowardly self with his like facade that he always had. And by integrating that, Dustin is going to want to talk about that a lot more. So my prediction is that Dustin has to complete a similar arc to Eddie. I don't think that he's going to die, but he will have to integrate his deeper emotional self with his intellect in order to be able to succeed. He needs to stand up for himself. He needs to not necessarily be seen as an outsider or somebody who's only an overthinker. He appears in the final shot among the folks of Hawkins, and as one of the only people who knows the truth about Eddie, his journey will be wrapped up in sharing the truth and the soul wisdom that's been hiding behind humor and overthinking this entire time. So next, we're going on to Will, Mike, Nancy, Jonathan, and the rest of the cast. Will is the eternal child. He is emotionally vast. He's psychically porous. This is an easy one because the eternal child is the Peter Pan of the world. He spends time in Neverland or in the Upside Down or in his fantasy worlds, and he is changed by all those experiences. And oftentimes we can see that he's been arrested in his development. When he is allowed to grow, when he is allowed to spend time away from his trauma, when he goes to California, he can step into the role of the hero of this arc, which is the reflective. The other personas of the eternal child are the entitled, which we see a lot in seasons 2 and 3 because he's being taken care of, whether it's by the mind flayer or by his parents. The lost. Will stays lost for a lot of times, and also he is a lost boy effectively when the mind flayer takes over him, despite the fact that he's not technically in Neverland anymore.
It's like I feel what the shadow monster's feeling. See what he's seeing. Some of him is there, but some of him is here too.
The romantic, we see that in his painting and his unspoken love of Mike. And like I said, he needs to step into the reflective as he moves into his heroic arc for season 5 and then become the traveler. And that's why I think that he is actually ultimately the sorcerer in this, because the traveler is someone who has traveled everywhere and who understands everybody and what they're experiencing. And he's able to master the experience of having been to the Upside Down so that he's no longer a victim of it, but he actually has all the benefits of having gone there. That is the essence of the eternal child and where they go in their arc. So the full prediction is that Will become not only the indicator of Vecna, which he's done for this whole time. That's his heroic arc. He's a reflection of the Upside Down and what Vecna or the Mind Flayer is thinking, but that he will have to return to the Upside Down and remember and demonstrate the mastery that he has over it. I don't think he just survives. He learns how to navigate it, and as well as the powers or anything that has happened as a result of it. And in doing so, he will become his mature counterpart to the person that he was in season 1. I think that he will likely go with Mike, who has never been to the Upside Down. Mike is the Divisive Immortal. All right, y'all. So Mike and Max are the two Divisive Immortals. Max in a state of death. And I believe that Mike is stuck between life and death and disconnection, devotion at this point. Mike is the boy who needs a lot of character development. And Mike is also someone who, because he shares it with Max, we're going to see how that looks. He uses the threat of death very early on when he's willing to jump off the cliff, or he's constantly going into the catastrophist, which is also a persona on this arc, constantly talking about what could happen. He starts off as the outcast, and then he ultimately becomes the faithful to Eleven. And he holds the place of the faithful to Eleven in her power for like the entirety of season 4, which is where he doesn't have a lot of character arc at all. Like he never steps into the hero of death. He always just is like, I'm rooting for you. Let's go. Let's go. And just like any other Divisive Immortal, he excludes those who don't follow his lead, like Lucas and Max in season 2. So the prediction that I have are 2 options. One is that Mike dies fulfilling Nancy's prophecy, exactly as Nancy said in her prophecy that Mike would be dead. Mike has to die in order to be able to help with the movement along of all of this. And the second part is that a part of him dies as opposed to him actually dying. So the prediction is that Mike will enter the Upside Down with Will and discover his own inner truth, that perhaps he, in fact, loves Will. I think we would see that this is already the case if there wasn't a heteronormative bias that we always have. We'd already assume that Will and Mike are a couple. So whether he dies or whether he comes to his full arc in which a part of him dies so that he's able to actually come to his full transformation. Mike's arc is about becoming real and about becoming the healer, just like Max is going to become the healer as well. The other indication that I have that Mike is going to die is just a little silly one, but do you guys remember that scene in The Order of the Phoenix when Dumbledore is sitting there next to Harry being like, Harry, you can do it. you gotta break through the thing. But there's so many parallels between Harry Potter and Stranger Things, which I won't even get into. But the scene here with Dumbledore and Harry, and then this scene here with the pizza dough freezer and Mike, they look a lot alike. And we know what happened to Dumbledore a single book later. After this, Dumbledore dies. There's a good indication that Mike will die, because what we recognize is that there comes a certain point when the person who's always motivating you, or the heart, is actually no longer, they need to make their own arc move. They can no longer just be the cheerleader from the side. So here's counting on you, Mike, for doing something here in this season. Next, we have Nancy, who is the Obedient Critic. The Obedient Critic belongs in the universe of belonging. This is an arc about structure and roles and leaderships. It is about fitting into the mold and then breaking it. The personas of this arc are the Perfectionist, which is her with all of her academic goals in season 1, the Imposter, which is basically her entire relationship with Steve, the People Pleaser, her job at the paper in season 3 when she was constantly trying to make everybody else happy, but not being happy at all. And then the hero of this arc is the Anarchist. So when she breaks the rules and she tells Barb's parents the truth, things along those lines. The legend of this arc is the Equalizer. And she does that because she becomes the prophetess of Vecna's vision in particular, or whoever may be above Vecna. And that we see that, in fact, Nancy in her anarchist role is so much happier than when she's just trying to conform and be the goody two-shoes that we see in all the earlier seasons. The prediction is that Nancy's prophetic vision will push her further into the role of the seer, in which she's going to be removing obstacles because she can see what's going on. She'll help remove the obstacles for others, but she'll also lose the stability that she's clung to her entire life, which is her home life and her safety net. That's part of this arc. To complete her arc, Nancy has to surrender the comfort of being the good girl and always having security, which is something that Jonathan has criticized her for in the past. Then she is truly free when she does that, and I think that's going to happen. So Jonathan is the other half of this codependent couple, and he is the Vengeful Martyr because he is always sacrificing himself for the people who he loves and sacrificing everything in order to be able to take care of Will or to be the big brother or something along those lines. Jonathan is the helper. He's the quiet sacrificer. He's the 2 in the Enneagram, which is the helper. He's the sacral center in human design when it's undefined. The personas of this arc are the banker. He suppresses Nancy's effort at the paper in order to be able to get into good graces, even though he knows that that's not going to necessarily work. He's the abandoned. When he confronts his father, we can see this. He's the apologetic. When he retreats into weed and the decision to basically not be involved, that's him being the apologetic. And we see that there's a moment when Jonathan could have come into his hero arc. If he had told Nancy about his plans and not just glossed over it in that moment when they were putting up the board on the window, like that was the moment that he could have turned hero, and he didn't. So we're going to see him struggling to become the hero, which is why my prediction is that he is going to be the one that dies. This may be indicated by the trailers as well, but my indication is that he's going to die because ultimately he failed to launch on his arc, which would have been to tell her about himself and to not sacrifice his own vision and instead just defer to her. And because he didn't do that, he is now going back into the vengeful part of this arc. My prediction is that he will die because of the fact that he will sacrifice himself in an act of vengeance for everything that's happened to everybody around him, because he couldn't actually come into his own and become the selfish, which is the hero of this arc, or the nourisher, which is the ultimate legend of this arc. Next, we have Joyce, Hopper, and Murray. They are all righteous bullies, which is the 8 in the Enneagram. It's the undefined Ajna center in human design. They love hard and they protect even harder. And they all share this arc, which is a form of aggressive protection as well as righteousness. And they do it in the name of love. Hopper tries to control Mike and 11. Joy is constantly trying to be the fixer. And Murray is honestly the pathogen, which is the persona on this arc that is, he's constantly trying to look at the system and turn it upside down. The hero form of this arc is the surrendered. And when they join together as a team in Russia, that is their prediction of coming into their hero arc. So all 3 of them have completed much of their arc by the end of season 4. So my guess and prediction is that in season 4, either their arc may shift or they may get sidelined or hijacked in some way, because effectively they're going to become the channeler. That's the legend of this. All 3 of them have some version of becoming the channeler, which means that if there's a mind flayer or there's something that can control their minds, that they are likely going to also be taken out of this, which will also allow the mechanics such to go back to the four boys again if we have Robin and Vickie and Steve behind glass, and we have the rest of these guys going into a space of becoming the channeler for whatever else needs to come out. And then finally, we have Eleven and Henry, the Invisible Destroyers. The thing that we have to recognize is that Invisible Destroyer is the head center in human design. It's the 9 in the Enneagram. So when pain goes unacknowledged, it creates new monsters. Vecna says, you are so fragile, just like him, like all the rest of them. But what Vecna really fears isn't weakness, it's embodiment. He's afraid of the fragility of the human body. And both Eleven and Henry share this Invisible Destroyer arc. The personas of this arc, the Invisible Destroyer is disconnected from the body. The Questioner is constantly questioning to stop from having to act, which is reflective of Vecna's obsession with existential truths. The Overwhelmed is Eleven most of the time. She's in the wounded child version of this, which is the Overwhelmed, which basically makes it so that she is constantly wondering, overwhelmed by her powers, overwhelmed by the world, overwhelmed by everything. And as a result of it, she finds it difficult to actually come out and become the hero of this arc. The Covert of this arc is the Addict. And when she escapes to the fake and into her fake California persona, that is a representation of her being the addict. The thing is that Henry, just like every good villain hero pairing, Henry chooses disembodiment. Whether it's his choice or not, he chooses disembodiment. 11 chooses embodiment. She chooses embodiment when she has to face Papa and she has to face everything that's happening. She chooses to not only harness her emotions to be able to get to the strength of her, she chooses, and she needs to be able to choose as she goes through this, a different way of understanding it. We're going to talk about Camazotz and The Wrinkle in Time, because I really genuinely think that 11's arc is going to look a lot like Meg's, which is embrace your flaws, embrace the pain of life. And that's how you're going to get through your arc. And that's how you're going to get back to the right side up. Because if Vecna chooses disembodiment and she chooses embodiment, that's how she can become the creative. And it's not just about healing what she's already destroyed, which is the gates. It's about creating something totally new and something totally beautiful that comes from a different space. All right, so let's get into what the titles could possibly mean, as they have already been dropped as of July 2025. Episode 1, The Crawl, Possible Meanings. Radio signals have always mattered in this show, whether it's the boys always communicating or searching for somebody in the Upside Down whenever 11 gets into her space. Crawling could be the experience of crawling through the dial to be able to try and find something out. We know that the radio is going to be very important in this coming time. Also, crawling could refer to a literal duct, a movement that at this point only Holly Wheeler could probably take, because she's going to be the only child small enough to be able to go through anything like a duct of any sort. Also, the book The Talisman. There's a reference to crawling between dimensions in the book The Talisman. The Talisman, of course, is the book that we see Lucas reading to Max at the end of season 4. So whether or not that has to do with that and this idea of what are you doing to try and crawl between the dimensions, and what are you doing to be able to make yourself as small as possible while you're going into those dimensions? Who possibly knows? It could be that crawling symbolizes a new fighting strategy or some sort of regression. The vanishing of blank. A lot of people think it's Holly, because that would be a very good reflection of what happens in the first season, and that we have to recognize that we're going to go back to the first season and we're going to go back to a lot of the themes of that. But I think it's Mike, and here's why. If Mike ends up going into the Upside Down, which he hasn't before, this would mirror season 1 and give Will a chance to return to the Upside Down, which he also has not been in there. We don't really want him to go to, but while Karen and Holly echo 11's healing between her and her mother, we also recognize that perhaps Mike is the one that needs to go into the Upside Down, because he has to progress on his arc, which, let's be honest, he hasn't done. And for most people, going into the Upside Down means that you are progressing on your arc, whether you like it or not, because touching into that space is touching into your own shadow work, even if it is technically 11's projection of her own shadow self. Chapter 3 is called The Turnbow Trap. So there could be a lot of different references to this. We've not actually seen anybody with the name Turnbow as far as we know. There is a sign that has somebody's face ripped off, like the bottom half of their face. So there's something along the lines of, what is it from the 50s? What is it from these earlier times that's happening? But it could also be a reference to what is referred to as the Turnbow Trap, which is actually a civil rights experience, which is also symbolizing a false flag operation or an intentional misdirect. It comes from Hartman Turnbow, who was accused of firebombing his own house in order to frame activists and encourage and discourage organizing. So the Turnbow Trap could be an understanding of a false flag operation, meaning they think that this is going to fix things or it's not. Or it could be an episode that represents Dustin and his movement through his arc, because we know, based on what we've talked about before, that Dustin is going to be dealing a lot with the people of Hawkins. And if for some reason there's some sort of blame that's happening or something that's happening, whenever we get to the third episode of these seasons, there's a lot of shadow work that has to happen. And this could be Dustin's going into the Turnbow Trap. Episode 4, Sorcerer. This one, anybody who plays D&D knows this. It's possibly a reference to the fact that Vecna is a lich. He's not actually a sorcerer. Nobody is a sorcerer yet. And that is the most biggest, baddest villain that you can get in D&D. And so whether it's Eleven going into her final form or whether it is somebody else who is revealing themselves as the sorcerer, we've seen images in the trailer of what the final villain looks like. Somebody without an eye. This could be Vecna, but at the same time, it also feels as if this is possibly somebody else or some different level of somebody else, because now that the dimensional rift has happened, maybe that was enough to be able to give Henry access to the right side up, which means that maybe he is now progressed on his journey, given the fact that he got his powers going into the Upside Down originally when he got stuck there for 12 hours, which we see in the play of Stranger Things, for all those who can catch on to all of this canon and where it's coming from. Episode 5, Shock Jock, reinforces again the importance of radio that we mentioned in the crawl. You know, Steve appears behind glass in the final shot, and I can't help but think that there's some sort of reference to what he's going to be doing with the radio, with his goal in terms of, we see the megahertz in the trailer, we see all sorts of different things like that. I think it has to do with that. Episode 6, Escape from Camazotz. So this is a reference to the Wheel in Time. There is another reference to this, but I believe that one of the Duffer Brothers actually held up the book A Wrinkle in Time, so we're going to do it strictly from that perspective. So A Wrinkle in Time, Camazotz is the planet of enforced conformity. And Vecna's goal has always been revealed as anti-human frailty in general. In A Wrinkle in Time, Meg saves her little brother, Charles Wallace, but first she saves her father, not with her strength, but with her flaws. And this could mirror Max's return, or Meg could be a representation of 11. And so what we see is that it could be that Max is a representation of Charles Wallace, who's come under the control of the force that's on Camazotz, of the darkness, and that 11 is Meg, and that she has to use her flaws in order to be able to release Meg from the Upside Down's thrall. And then that leads us to 7, because if you know A Wrinkle in Time, you recognize that the actual way that people travel from one planet to another, or from one dimension to another in this, is through love, that to tesser. And by tessering, you have to fully accept and love yourself. And so the idea that the 7th episode is called The Bridge may have a reference again to The Wrinkle in Time, which talks about what is the bridge and how are you actually able to move from one place to another, from the upside down to the right side up, not through these holes which are caused by pain, but through a different method. And then that leads us to chapter 8, the right side up. 11 must learn to live in the world, not as an invisible destroyer, but as a creator. And it's not about closing a gate. We've done that. Literally, we've done that all the other times. We've done that in chapter 1, 2, 3. We've done that all these different times, and we are ready for something else. So what does it mean to actually be in the right side up? And if you found the bridge, if you've learned how to tesser between one place and another, how are you using love to be able to really help you with that? All right, so here are the different theories and how much I love them or how much they don't make any sense. The first is that Karen is Vecna's sister. I like this for the understanding of the fact that that's why the Wheelers in general have been treated specially throughout all of this, why Nancy was given the prophecy from Vecna. There's a number of different things I feel like in there that are really interesting if in fact Karen was Henry's sister, and therefore the Wheelers are actually related to him in general. I love that one. Next is that Henry is actually Eleven's father, which in terms of timing actually makes sense in whatever sake it can. And it also makes sense for the fact that Henry passed on his powers to 11, even though Henry got his powers in the Upside Down. And therefore, what does that mean for 11 if she actually has to recognize that she's not just breaking her own pattern, but she's breaking generational trauma, which, you know, is always going to be a really interesting take on it. The other one is that Will is actually the sorcerer, which we didn't talk about in that sorcerer episode, but this idea that anybody who goes to the Upside Down for any time period, Henry was only there for 12 hours and Will was there for 7 days. So there's a very likely chance that Will actually could be the sorcerer himself. And there's a lot of references to the fact that sorcerers in D&D are typically dragons. He painted the picture that had the dragon in it. There's a lot of different references that may say that this is an indication of the fact that Will is actually the sorcerer and that his time in the Upside Down was what gave him access to powers. And that is what he's having to recognize himself. That would actually be the full extent of him coming in his full arc as the traveler that we talked about earlier, is if he came to that full fruition. The other one, which I just have to mention because I mentioned it briefly earlier, is that the Duffer Brothers made a mistake by basically putting Will's birthday on the crawl at the bottom of the videotape, which seems very, very unlikely that they would make that mistake. And if that's the case, then we recognize that actually maybe Will never even got out of the Upside Down, or some huge, you know, some kind of huge thing. Like we've had a lot of those spoilers in past seasons about, oh, it's all a dream. You don't need to worry about it. Let's see where it goes. I don't think that they're going to do that to us, but I just wanted to mention it anyway. The other thing that I think is really important to recognize, and one that I also wanted to talk about one last time, is the timeline glitch. So we're told that the Upside Down was created when Henry was cast into it. Technically, he was cast into it the first time, and maybe it wasn't created, it was discovered. And so whether or not it was created when Henry first went into it, when he was pushed into there again by 11 years later, or if it happened when 11 first made the break between the two things, it's hard to tell. But what we do know is that the Hawkins Upside Down was made on the day that 11 first reopened the portal and Will went into the Upside Down. And so whether that world was created by Will as a way to be able to function and that he had capabilities, so he created the Upside Down in the moment and the day that he was there, hard to say, but I do think it's something that's really important. It could also be that Henry or Vecna set a trap that meant that Hawkins was created in the Upside Down because that was going to give some sort of power, but it doesn't really make any sense. To me, it strikes me more as something that would come from somebody like Will, because there's an understanding of the fact that Will was having to cope with everything that was going on at the time. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to create at least Castle Byers. We're going to create our house. We're going to create a mechanism for which we can actually see it, because Henry never created those things. Henry never had access. Henry never saw Hawkins in the time in which on that day in October in which Will was actually went into the Upside Down. So I suspect that Will was the one who created the Hawkins version of the Upside Down, which is why he has a strong capability and a strong ability to be able to affect and possibly become the sorcerer. And so this is the mythic beauty of all of Stranger Things. As we can see, the Upside Down wasn't just accessed, it was born, and it was born from pain. And every single one of these characters, just as all of us do, have this path of pain and what is it we're doing and where are we going? And what we can recognize is that this is an allegory. This is a story that shows how we can choose to move through our arcs. And you can choose any one of the characters that you relate to. The character that you really love and you're just like, oh my God, I love that character so much. You may not say they remind me of me, but they may remind you of somebody you love. Or you may get really, really triggered by a character. It's a really good way to be like, oh, maybe I'm on that part of my arc right now. Like if the decisions that you see that Mike Wheeler are going through are really annoying, you're like, oh, I could be a Divisive Immortal right now, or I could do something like that. And so maybe in the end, with all of this speculation about what could be and what is about to be, maybe the only way to truly close the dimensional rift is to reimagine what it means to be whole for each and every one of us. I hope that y'all have enjoyed this, and please let me know in the comments. We are a small, little, tiny, wonderful channel, and any comments that you make, any sharing that you make, it all helps so much. Thanks.